Imagine being sent to fight in a war no one believes in, with no reinforcements, no supplies, and no hope, and still coming out victorious. This is the story of a battalion the world tried to erase. Yet they defied impossible odds and changed the course of history. Asterisk during World War II. Some soldiers were forgotten, not by choice, but by circumstance. Cut off from support, ignored by their own command. And facing an enemy that outnumbered them 10-1, this battalion endured what no one thought possible. Their story is one of resilience, strategy, and unbreakable spirit. Today, we'll uncover how these men, abandoned by the world, managed to achieve a victory that still resonates decades later. Asterisk, the story of the forgotten. Battalion begins in the bitter winter of 1942. Officially, they were a standard infantry unit assigned to hold a remote sector on the Eastern Front during World War II. Unofficially, they were on a mission that no one expected them to survive. Their orders were vague, their supplies limited, and their commanders, overextended and preoccupied, had little interest in their plight. The battalion's morale was fragile from the start. But the men carried a quiet determination born of necessity. Survive or die trying. Their deployment zone was a frozen wasteland, miles from the nearest friendly base. The harsh terrain alone claimed more men than the enemy in the first week. Frostbite, exhaustion, and starvation were constant threats, each step across the icy ground a battle in itself. Yet, the soldiers adapted quickly. Makeshift shelters were built from debris and snow. Rationing became an art, with every scrap of food carefully measured. Their leaders knew that maintaining cohesion was vital. If discipline faltered, the battalion would crumble long before the enemy could strike. The enemy, a well-equipped division, was aware of the battalion's presence and assumed an easy victory. Reconnaissance reports described the unit as isolated, undermanned, and nearly incapacitated. They underestimated the soldiers' ingenuity. The battalion began using guerrilla tactics, exploiting their knowledge of the terrain and the harsh winter conditions. They set traps in narrow valleys, used snowdrifts for camouflage, and moved only at night to avoid detection. Their ingenuity turned desperation into advantage, and the enemy began to take notice. Communication with headquarters was nearly impossible. Radio signals were sporadic, and supply lines had been cut months before. Letters from home arrived sporadically, often weeks after being sent, if at all. The soldiers understood that no one was coming for them, not their commanders, not reinforcements, not even supplies. In many ways, they were truly abandoned. Yet, instead of succumbing to despair, the battalion found strength in each other. Bonds formed in adversity became unbreakable. Men who had been strangers months before now trusted each other with their lives. Every sentry shift, every patrol, every shared ration deepened their resolve. The first major engagement came when the enemy attempted a direct assault on their forward positions. The battalion, though outnumbered 3-1, used the terrain to their advantage. Narrow passes funneled the enemy into kill zones, while hidden machine gun nests and sniper positions decimated advancing forces. Casualties were high, but the battalion's coordination and resilience turned what could have been a rout into a defensive triumph. Commanders at distant headquarters received reports of the battle with disbelief. How did they hold? One wrote, "Impossible." Despite their success, the challenges only grew. The enemy regrouped and brought reinforcements, including armored units and artillery. The battalion had little in the way of anti-tank weaponry or heavy support. They improvised, using captured equipment and makeshift explosives. One group of soldiers converted abandoned carts into mobile barricades and traps, while others set up decoys to confuse the enemy's aerial reconnaissance. These innovations slowed the enemy's advance and bought the battalion precious time. Time they desperately needed to regroup and plan. Morale, however, was a constant struggle. Soldiers lived with the reality that they were forgotten by the world. Letters to families often went unanswered, and there was no promise of recognition or reward. Yet, within the battalion, a culture of mutual protection and determination took root. Officers and enlisted men alike shared stories from home, jokes, and memories to keep spirits alive. In the freezing darkness, they would huddle together, singing quietly, reminding themselves why they fought not for medals, but for each other. The battalion's defining moment came during what would later be called the Battle of the Northern Ridge. Enemy forces, confident in their superiority, launched a massive offensive aimed at breaking the battalion's lines and capturing the surrounding territory. The soldiers, anticipating the attack, prepared meticulously. Every trap was checked, every patrol completed, every piece of terrain memorized. When the enemy struck at dawn, the battalion executed a series of defensive maneuvers that were both daring and precise. Artillery fire from the enemy hammered their positions, yet the soldiers held. Communication within the unit remained surprisingly effective. Runners and signal flares relayed orders, while small squads executed coordinated counterattacks. The enemy was forced to fight through a maze of ambushes, collapsing snow bridges, and hidden sharpshooters. By the end of the first day, the attackers were confused and disorganized, suffering casualties that far exceeded expectations. But the battle was far from over. Night fell, bringing freezing temperatures and limited visibility. The battalion used the cover of darkness to launch daring raids on enemy supply lines, further destabilizing their opponent. Men moved silently through snowdrifts, taking out sentries, burning supplies, and capturing intelligence. Each success fueled their determination. Each small victory was a testament to their resilience. As days turned into weeks, the battalion continued to repel attacks, each engagement highlighting their extraordinary discipline and adaptability. Reports from distant command centers noted the impossibility of their survival. But the battalion continued to defy expectations. Their survival was no longer a matter of luck, it was the result of strategy, courage, and unwavering solidarity. Eventually, relief forces arrived not because the battalion had been remembered, but because their tenacity had forced the enemy to overextend. The so-called forgotten battalion had not only survived, but had inflicted damage far beyond what any analyst had predicted. Their names were added to history books, but recognition could never fully capture the human cost, the exhaustion, the fear, and the quiet moments of heroism that had defined their journey. Even after the war, the soldiers carried the weight of their experiences. Many spoke of the nights spent huddled in frozen trenches, of rationing their last crumbs, of holding each other up when hope seemed lost. The bonds formed in those desperate days lasted a lifetime. Veterans of the battalion often said that what they had learned was simple. When the world abandons you, the only thing that matters is trust, courage, and refusing to give up. In the decades since, historians have studied their tactics, their innovations, and their extraordinary resilience. Military academies cite their improvisation under extreme conditions as a case study in leadership and adaptability. Yet the true story of the battalion is not found in strategy alone, it is found in the human spirit. These soldiers, abandoned and outnumbered, discovered the limitless capacity of determination, loyalty, and hope. Their story serves as a reminder that history is often written in moments of quiet courage, not just in grand victories. The forgotten battalion was never famous during the war, and for a long time it seemed the world had truly abandoned them. But through grit, ingenuity, and the unbreakable bonds forged in adversity, they proved that even the forgotten can achieve the impossible. Their victory was not merely a tactical success, it was a testament to the human spirit, a story of resilience that continues to inspire all who hear it. This battalion's journey reminds us that heroism is not always about recognition, medals, or applause. It is about standing firm when the world has turned its back, about protecting those who cannot protect themselves, and about refusing to surrender, no matter the odds. In the frozen fields of the Eastern Front, these men became legends not because the world remembered them at the time, but because they refused to forget each other, even today. Military historians and veterans alike reflect on their courage, innovation, and endurance. Their story transcends the battlefield. It is a story of unity, perseverance, and the indomitable will to survive. The Forgotten Battalion, abandoned by the world, left a legacy far greater than any medal or commendation. Their triumph stands as proof that even in the darkest hour, human determination can turn despair into victory. The Forgotten Battalion's ordeal was far from over, even after their initial defensive victories. Weeks of constant combat, exposure to freezing winds, and the psychological toll of isolation had begun to weigh heavily on the men. Every step outside their makeshift trenches was a calculated risk. Snowdrifts could conceal hidden enemy patrols. Frozen rivers could collapse underfoot. Yet their experience had honed their instincts to near perfection. They learned to move silently, to anticipate enemy patterns, and to trust each other implicitly. Each morning, the men conducted careful reconnaissance. Scouts, often volunteers chosen for their endurance and stealth, would navigate the perilous terrain ahead, mapping enemy positions and supply routes. These scouts became the eyes and ears of the battalion, reporting back with sketches, notes, and sometimes fragments of intercepted communication. The information they gathered allowed the battalion to stage ambushes that were both efficient and devastating, ensuring that even heavily armed enemy forces struggled to maintain any advantage. One of the most critical innovations came from Sergeant Thomas Keller, a veteran of previous campaigns who had survived countless near-death experiences. Keller suggested building a network of concealed shelters and tunnels connecting key positions across their sector. The men worked tirelessly, digging under snow and ice, creating hidden caches for weapons, food, and medical supplies. This ingenuity allowed the battalion to operate independently, almost like a shadow army that appeared where the enemy least expected them. The enemy, initially dismissive of the battalion, began to grow wary. Reports described their frustration at repeated ambushes, missing supply convoys, and unexplained artillery fire from hidden positions. Senior German officers began questioning the competence of their troops, unaware that it was not superior numbers or equipment that gave the battalion an edge, but their relentless determination and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Each small victory further fueled the soldiers' morale. They began to understand that even abandoned by the world, they could shape the battlefield on their own terms. Morale was reinforced not only by strategy, but by human connections. Letters from home, though delayed and sparse, arrived sporadically, providing glimpses of normal life and a sense of purpose beyond survival. The battalion formed small rituals to maintain their humanity, shared meals when rations allowed, stories exchanged around small fires, and quiet songs hummed to keep the cold at bay. The men understood that camaraderie was their strongest weapon. Without it, survival would have been impossible. The battalion's next major engagement tested their ingenuity and resolve like never before. Intelligence had revealed that an enemy armored division was advancing through a narrow valley, planning to cut them off from any remaining supply lines. Outnumbered and under-equipped, the battalion devised a daring plan. They prepared the valley with traps, obstacles, and makeshift anti-tank defenses. Small squads were assigned to harass the advancing troops, while others created noise and smoke to simulate a larger force. When the enemy moved in, the battalion executed their plan flawlessly. Snow-covered pits, concealed spikes, and explosives, catching tanks off guard. Hidden artillery fired from positions the enemy thought were empty. Each step of the advance was met with a coordinated response that left the attackers disoriented and demoralized. Despite being physically exhausted, the battalion maintained a level of discipline that seemed almost superhuman. For days, they fought relentlessly, never allowing the enemy to gain momentum. Amid the chaos, individual acts of heroism became emblematic of the battalion's spirit. Corporal James O'Neill, despite severe frostbite, dragged a wounded comrade through enemy fire to a safe location, refusing to leave him behind. Lieutenant Harris, already injured in previous skirmishes, continued to coordinate defenses, refusing evacuation. These acts were not for recognition, they were a matter of principle. Each soldier understood that the strength of the unit depended on each member's survival. Supply shortages remained a constant challenge. The battalion scavenged from abandoned villages and captured enemy depots, often risking ambushes to retrieve food, ammunition, and medical supplies. Ingenious improvisation became second nature. Broken rifles were repaired with scavenged parts. Empty crates became sleds to transport wounded soldiers. Snow and ice were melted for water. The men adapted to their environment in ways that would later be studied in military academies as examples of field ingenuity. Despite their hardships, the battalion remained focused on the larger objective. They knew that holding their ground was not enough. They had to continue to disrupt enemy operations and protect strategic positions. Night raids became a regular part of their strategy. Moving silently under cover of darkness, small squads sabotaged enemy supply lines, burned fuel depots, and eliminated sentries. Each successful mission weakened the enemy and reinforced the battalion's reputation as a force that could not be ignored, even by those who had initially abandoned them. Over time, the battalion's resilience began to inspire not only each other, but also nearby units, soldiers from other regiments. Observing the determination and ingenuity of the forgotten battalion, adopted similar tactics. Commanders began to quietly reference the battalion's methods, recognizing that their survival depended on adaptability and cohesion, not merely numbers or equipment. The battalion, though still largely unrecognized by high command, had become a quiet legend among those who fought alongside them. The human cost, however, was ever present. Men battled hunger, illness, frostbite, and the constant threat of death. Each casualty was felt deeply, a stark reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Letters home were often incomplete, censored, or delayed, leaving families unaware of their loved ones' ongoing struggles. Yet, in the face of despair, the soldiers drew strength from one another. Every act of support, every shared meal, every whispered word of encouragement reinforced the bond that had become the battalion's lifeline. Their defining achievement came during the final days of the campaign in that sector. Facing an overwhelming enemy offensive aimed at eliminating their position entirely, the battalion executed a series of maneuvers that would later be hailed as tactical masterpieces. Using the terrain, improvised defenses, and coordinated ambushes, they held off attacks that seemed insurmountable. Exhaustion and injury did not deter them. Their focus remained on one goal: survive and ensure that every soldier returned home. When relief finally arrived, the battalion emerged not as a broken remnant, but as a disciplined and battle-hardened unit. Their survival, against all odds, had disrupted enemy operations, secured vital territory, and inspired nearby Allied forces. Yet, even as they were officially recognized, the men themselves remained humble. They had survived not through glory-seeking, but through resilience, adaptability, and loyalty to each other. The world may have forgotten them for a time, but their actions left an indelible mark on the course of the war. Decades later, historians would study the forgotten battalion to understand the essence of survival and ingenuity in warfare. Military schools referenced their improvisation under extreme conditions, while veterans recounted stories of courage and solidarity that transcended the battlefield. The battalion's experience became a testament to the idea that even in the direst circumstances, human determination, unity, and perseverance can achieve the impossible. The legacy of the Forgotten Battalion is not measured in medals or headlines, but in the enduring spirit of those who refuse to surrender. Their story reminds us that heroism is often quiet, unseen, and uncelebrated at the moment, but its impact resonates for generations. The men who were abandoned by the world during World War II demonstrated that courage and loyalty, even when unnoticed, can shape history and inspire all who hear their tale. The Forgotten Battalion's moment of ultimate trial came during what would later be described as the Battle of Iron Pass. Intelligence had indicated that a major enemy offensive was underway, designed to crush their isolated position and wipe out the unit entirely. Outnumbered, undersupplied, and exhausted from weeks of continuous combat, the men faced an impossible scenario. Yet it was in this moment of extreme adversity that the battalion would define itself not by the medals it might earn, but by the courage, ingenuity, and unbreakable bond of the soldiers within it. From the first light of dawn, the battalion prepared for an onslaught unlike any they had faced. Snow swirled around their defensive positions, adding an eerie chill to the already tense atmosphere. Officers moved among the men, giving final instructions, inspecting weapons, and reinforcing morale. Sergeant Keller, whose tunnels and fortifications had saved lives countless times before, coordinated the deployment of hidden explosives and traps along key enemy approach routes. Every squad was assigned a precise position. Every man knew his duty. The sense of unity among them was palpable, a silent acknowledgement that failure meant death, not only for oneself, but for comrades who relied on you as the enemy advanced. The battalion executed their plan with ruthless precision. Narrow passes funneled armored units directly into kill zones, where concealed anti-tank explosives shredded treads and immobilized vehicles. Machine gun nests, hidden in snowdrifts and behind debris, erupted into deadly fire, cutting down advancing infantry. The battalion's previous weeks of reconnaissance paid off. Every trap, every ambush, every hidden cache of ammunition was deployed to maximum effect. The enemy, expecting an easy victory, was immediately thrown into chaos. The fighting escalated into a relentless, brutal contest. Men moved continuously, taking turns manning positions, tending to the wounded, and reinforcing barricades. Communications were maintained through runners, signal flares, and a complex series of whistles and hand signals. Coordination was critical. A single misstep could have allowed the enemy to penetrate their lines. Yet the soldiers operated as if connected by a single mind, responding to threats with instinctive efficiency. Amid the chaos, acts of heroism emerged that would later become legendary. Corporal James O'Neill, already frostbitten and exhausted, rescued a group of trapped soldiers from a collapsing trench under heavy fire. Private Anton Fisher, despite being wounded, continued to supply ammunition to the front lines, moving across open ground with remarkable bravery. Lieutenant Harris personally led counterattacks to reclaim lost positions, ignoring his own injuries. These were not acts for glory, they were survival, a refusal to abandon each other in the direst of circumstances. By midday, the battalion had inflicted significant damage on the enemy. Tanks were destroyed, supply lines severed, and morale among the attackers plummeted. The soldiers' defensive ingenuity had transformed a desperate situation into a strategic nightmare for the enemy. Yet, the cost was high. Casualties mounted, exhaustion was near total, and the extreme cold sapped strength from even the most resilient men. Every victory had been bought with sweat, blood, and relentless endurance. As evening approached, the enemy launched a final massive assault, concentrating all available forces on the battalion's key positions. The snowstorm intensified, reducing visibility and complicating coordination. The soldiers, however, adapted with remarkable resourcefulness, using makeshift camouflage and pre-laid decoys. They created the illusion of greater numbers, misleading the enemy into attacking positions that were traps. Explosions rocked the valley, Smoke filled the air, and the sound of gunfire echoed for miles. Yet the battalion held firm. Night fell, bringing both relief and additional challenges. The enemy had not retreated, and under the cover of darkness, they attempted infiltration. Small squads of soldiers from the battalion moved silently through the snow, intercepting and neutralizing these threats before they could reach critical positions. Improvised flares and signal fires allowed coordination across the freezing terrain, guiding reinforcements to hotspots of engagement. Despite the physical and emotional toll, the men remained focused. Driven by a shared understanding, they could not fail. During one particularly desperate moment, a section of the line began to falter under heavy enemy fire. Sergeant Keller led a small team on a daring counterattack, moving through snowdrifts and debris to flank the attackers. With coordinated fire and explosives, they neutralized the threat and stabilized the line. This decisive action exemplified the battalion's combination of courage, tactical innovation, and unwavering determination. Every soldier's contribution mattered, and in that unity lay their greatest strength. By the third day, the enemy, exhausted and demoralized, began to withdraw. Reports of the battalion's resistance and unexpected tactical brilliance had reached higher command, though still with a degree of disbelief. The men had not only survived, they had achieved a victory far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Strategic objectives were met, enemy forces were decimated, and the battalion remained largely intact despite relentless pressure. Their triumph was not just a matter of survival, but of mastery over circumstance, terrain, and adversary alike. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true scale of the battalion's achievement. They had turned the tide in a sector that could have collapsed under enemy pressure, preventing further incursions and protecting key supply routes. The soldiers, many near the brink of exhaustion, were still capable of organizing defenses, tending to wounded comrades, and maintaining order within their ranks. Their resilience in the face of adversity became a case study in military strategy, leadership, and human endurance. Yet, the climax of their ordeal was not measured in victories alone. It was measured in the unyielding spirit that carried them through 3 days of continuous, life-threatening combat. It was in the shared determination that no man would be left behind. It was in the quiet moments when soldiers huddled together for warmth, sharing stories and reinforcing bonds that transcended fear and pain. These intangible elements, the human connections, the ingenuity, the sheer will to survive, were the real reasons the forgotten battalion endured when the world had written them off. News of their victory eventually reached distant command posts and even Allied headquarters, though often accompanied by skepticism. How could a unit that had been abandoned, undersupplied, and outnumbered achieve what they had? Investigations and debriefings followed, revealing the battalion's innovative defensive strategies, use of terrain, and unwavering morale. Their success was attributed not to luck, but to the extraordinary human spirit of each soldier, the courage to act independently, yet cohesively, under extreme stress. Decades later, veterans recounted the Battle of Iron Pass with reverence. They described the moments of fear, the acts of heroism, the exhaustion, and the victories, both large and small, that defined their experience. Sergeant Keller's tunnels, Corporal O'Neill's daring rescues, Lieutenant Harris's leadership under fire — these stories were not just about tactical brilliance, but about the endurance of humanity under unimaginable pressure. The battalion's actions became emblematic of what ordinary men could achieve when bound by loyalty, ingenuity, and the refusal to surrender, even in peacetime. The legacy of the forgotten battalion endured. Military academies referenced their tactics, emphasizing creativity, resilience, and decentralized leadership. Historians highlighted their story as an example of courage against impossible odds. Veterans, families, and the broader public came to appreciate that the true measure of their heroism was not in medals or official recognition, but in the quiet triumph of survival, solidarity, and determination. Ultimately, the battalion's climax, the 3 days of relentless combat at Iron Pass, revealed the extraordinary potential of human spirit when facing extreme adversity. It proved that even when abandoned by the world, a cohesive, determined group could defy expectations, achieve the impossible, and leave a legacy that would inspire generations. Their story remains a testament to the power of unity, ingenuity, and courage, forever etched into the history of World War II. The Forgotten Battalion, once overlooked and disregarded, became a symbol of what can be accomplished when determination surpasses fear, when brotherhood surpasses individual survival, and when hope survives even in the most desolate conditions. Their climax was not simply a military victory, was a human victory, a triumph of perseverance, ingenuity, and the unwavering refusal to be defeated. The Forgotten Battalion's defining moment reached its peak during the grueling days of the Battle of Iron Pass. By the time the enemy launched their concentrated offensive, the battalion had been engaged in continuous skirmishes, ambushes, and survival operations for weeks. Exhaustion and frostbite had claimed many, yet their discipline and ingenuity remained unbroken. The enemy, confident in their superiority, assumed the battalion would collapse under the pressure of sheer numbers and relentless artillery fire. They were wrong. From the pre-dawn hours, the battalion meticulously prepared for the onslaught. Snow covered the trenches and defensive positions, blending with camouflaged obstacles and concealed minefields. Sergeant Thomas Keller, whose experience in previous campaigns had saved countless lives, coordinated the placement of improvised explosives and barricades. Every man had a role. Some were positioned as snipers to pick off key targets. Others laid traps along anticipated enemy routes, and small squads were ready to counterattack at any breach. The level of preparation was extraordinary, especially considering their lack of resources. When the first wave of enemy infantry and armor emerged from the foggy, snow-covered valley, the battalion struck with precision. Tanks were funneled into narrow ravines where concealed anti-tank explosives disabled their mobility, and machine gun nests, carefully hidden in snowbanks, opened fire with deadly efficiency. Enemy soldiers, expecting an easy victory, were thrown into confusion and disarray. The battalion had transformed the natural landscape into a strategic weapon, turning each frozen hill, frozen river, and jagged cliff into a trap. The fighting intensified as the enemy attempted to regroup and mount a coordinated assault. Artillery shells screamed across the valley, detonating among makeshift shelters, but the battalion's fortifications held. Soldiers moved with an almost supernatural rhythm, rotating positions, carrying ammunition, and tending to the wounded, all while under continuous fire. The cohesion of the unit was remarkable. Men who had once been strangers now operated as extensions of each other, responding instinctively to threats, reinforcing lines, and executing maneuvers that would later be hailed as exemplary military strategy. Individual acts of heroism punctuated the chaos. Corporal James O'Neill, despite suffering severe frostbite, dragged multiple wounded comrades to safety under relentless gunfire. Private Anton Fisher, badly injured, continued to distribute ammunition to the front lines, ensuring that every defensive position remained operational. Lieutenant Harris, bleeding from multiple wounds, personally led counterattacks to reclaim lost ground, refusing evacuation until the line was stabilized. These acts were not for recognition. They were survival and loyalty incarnate. A living demonstration of the battalion's ethos, no man left behind, as the hours wore on. Enemy commanders became increasingly frustrated. The battalion's unexpected effectiveness forced them into erratic maneuvers, stretching supply lines and leaving their units vulnerable to ambushes. Each enemy advance was met with traps, counterattacks, and feints that compounded confusion. Soldiers of the Forgotten Battalion, despite frostbite, hunger, and fatigue, maintained a strategic clarity born from intimate knowledge of their terrain and relentless practice. They exploited every crevice, ridge, and forest edge to turn disadvantage into opportunity. Nightfall brought both relief and new challenges. Snowstorms reduced visibility, complicating communication and coordination, yet the battalion adapted. Small squads patrolled perimeters, intercepted enemy infiltration attempts, and maintained contact using signal flares, whistles, and runners. The extreme cold numbed fingers and slowed movements, but it also concealed actions, allowing soldiers to strike silently and unpredictably. Improvisation became second nature. Makeshift bridges, decoys, and hidden firing positions multiplied their effectiveness, turning every setback into a tactical advantage. On the second day, the battalion faced an even more overwhelming assault. Enemy reinforcements included fresh infantry, tanks, and artillery, determined to crush their resistance. Yet, the battalion, now battle-hardened and cohesive beyond measure, executed a plan that showcased both ingenuity and courage. Using tunnels and hidden positions created in the preceding weeks, squads were able to ambush the attackers from multiple angles simultaneously. Flames from small incendiary traps, snow-covered pitfalls, and carefully timed artillery rounds decimated the enemy, forcing retreats in confusion. The human toll was immense. Men fought with frostbitten hands, hunger gnawed at stomachs, and the constant noise of artillery and gunfire strained nerves to the breaking point. Yet, even in the face of fatigue, panic, and loss, the battalion never faltered. Each soldier's determination reinforced the others. Acts of heroism continued. Wounded men refused evacuation, carrying on their duties. Messengers braved open ground repeatedly to maintain communication, and leaders coordinated complex maneuvers while injured themselves by the third day. The enemy's strength was visibly waning. Their initial confidence had turned into desperation. Repeated ambushes, hidden traps, and unpredictable counterattacks had shattered their coordination. The battalion, though physically battered, had achieved the impossible. They had held their ground against overwhelming odds, inflicted massive losses on a superior enemy force, and maintained operational cohesion throughout the ordeal. Their unity, ingenuity, and indomitable spirit had transformed an abandoned, outnumbered unit into a decisive defensive force. The aftermath of the battle revealed the full scope of the battalion's achievements. Enemy reports, later captured, described confusion, panic, and disbelief. Commanders could not comprehend how a supposedly forgotten battalion had thwarted their meticulously planned offensive. Military analysts praised their tactical innovation, concealed explosives, improvised fortifications, nighttime raids, and coordinated small unit maneuvers became studied examples of battlefield strategy. Yet the most important victory was human, not tactical. The battalion survived intact. Against overwhelming odds, decades later, veterans recounted these moments with reverence. They remembered the bitter cold, the endless snow, the deafening noise of artillery, and the exhaustion that seemed insurmountable. They also remembered the camaraderie, the humor, the shared determination to protect one another. The soldiers' courage, endurance, and ingenuity were tested to extremes. Yet each emerged with the knowledge that unity and perseverance could defy even the harshest conditions. The climax of the forgotten battalion's story, the relentless three-day battle at Iron Pass remains one of the most extraordinary examples of resilience in military history. It demonstrates that even in isolation, without recognition or support, human determination can create victory from the bleakest circumstances. Their triumph was not measured in medals or accolades, but in survival, solidarity, and the unbreakable bond forged in adversity. Through these events, the battalion cemented its legacy. Their story serves as a reminder that heroism often occurs in silence, away from the world's eyes. Their success was a combination of courage, innovation, and absolute trust in one another, showing that even when abandoned, a determined and cohesive group can achieve the impossible. The Forgotten Battalion's Iron Pass engagement symbolizes the pinnacle of human perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds. It illustrates that strategy and skill are amplified by morale, trust, and unyielding determination. Even abandoned by the world, these soldiers turn despair into triumph, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire. Their story proves that heroism is not always about recognition, but about the strength to endure, the will to survive, and the courage to fight for one another when all hope seems lost.